Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Music Production Podcast. This is Brian Funk. I'm your host. I make music as AfroDJMac. And this is our 50th episode. Yay. All right. Very excited about that. Had no idea it would get this far. I'm really happy to have made it. Super happy that you are listening and presumably want me to keep making this show. It's been a lot of fun. Got to talk to a lot of great people. Got a lot of great people in line to talk to next. And lots of tips, ideas, thoughts, and everything to keep sharing. So, I'm definitely not out of things to say or people to talk to, so we'll keep going with this. Really thankful for anyone who's left a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. We've got 5-star reviews all over iTunes, which is great. Some really flattering comments, too, which I really appreciate. It's such a great way to, support the podcast and help out. If you like what you see and hear, or hear, I guess, please feel free, leave a review. I really do appreciate it. I love all the suggestions and comments. That I've considered this a conversation, so I want to hear from you and what you like, what you want me to change, what you want me to add, and so on and so forth. So it has been a lot of fun. And I'm excited, just because I guess I love making music, but this is an episode that's going to kind of tie in with Finish February 2018. So this is a project that we're launching to get us finishing music in February. If you've done the January 2018 challenge, just a quick reminder, if you haven't, it's an opportunity to make a jam every day in January. And what we want to do with those jams in February is finish them and actually do something with them and not just let them sit and join the graveyard of unfinished ideas that lives on probably most of our hard drives. I know mine is a significant percentage of all of my storage on my computer. I hate to admit it, but it's true. A lot of ideas get started but never get finished. And that is something I want to help you and myself avoid as much as possible in the future and get to finishing tracks. Finishing tracks is so important, even if they're not the greatest tracks in the world, because it takes you through the entire production process. We very often just start off with the beginnings of a track, and I know myself, I can, sound like I know what I'm doing in the very early stages of a track because I practice that all the time. That's something I do every single time I make music is start. But I don't always progress. I don't always finish tracks. So that is where I think I need the most work, and I'd probably be willing to bet that that goes along with a lot of people because you don't get to that stage unless you go through the other stages first. And therefore, it's the one part you practice the least, most likely. So we're trying to get some practice in there, and I think that's a great way to think about finish February 2018, to think about it as just practice finishing tracks, practice getting things done, practice progressing. So in the last episode that I talked about this, which I believe was number 48, we talked about a spreadsheet I made that helps you organize your ideas in your different January tracks or whatever tracks you want to use within your Finish February project. I just finished mine. It is February 12th right now, so I've only just finished doing my spreadsheet today. And I will admit, I expected to be further along, but it's been a pretty busy time. Ableton Live 10 just came out, so found myself pretty wrapped up in putting together some tutorials. I focused on Push 2, and I did my tutorials for Warp Academy. You can go to warpacademy.com and check out the course called Warp 10. It's completely free. It is about 15 to 20 tutorials. I forget the exact number, all created by 7 different certified Ableton Live trainers. And it's really well done. Warp Academy has a really high standard of quality, which has sometimes the thing that makes it hard for me to get work done with them because it is such a high standard and it's challenging. So, once again, I was, put through my own personal ringer to make some quality videos. I'm really happy with the way they came out. It's 4 videos on all the updates to Push 2 in Ableton Live 10. They came out great. Big thanks to Drew Vespers from Warp Academy for really putting this thing together, and some great trainers, including Merlin Silva, who I spoke to on the podcast recently, Jake Perrine, we got Ian Gallagher, and a bunch of other people that have, really kind of mastered their understanding of Ableton Live and have had a lot of time with Live 10. So, I think that's a great place to go check out some of the new features in Live 10 and learn it inside and out, So, great course. I'm really proud to be part of that. That definitely took up a lot of time. Doing my Berkeley online classes, which have been excellent. There's a really cool sampling class that uses Ableton Live to do sampling. I'm really excited, and the quality of work my students are putting out are awesome. So it's been keeping me busy, but I know that especially next week, I will have a lot more time to really hone in on my finished February project, because I don't have work, which is nice. Winter recess is a beautiful thing. So that's definitely where I plan to get a lot of my work done, but I'm gearing up now, and I'm excited. It's been fun because I spent a little bit of time away from my tracks, and now I'm coming back to them, as I start analyzing them and deciding which ones I want to use and which ones are kind of related to each other. So if you haven't already, I do think this spreadsheet is really useful. You can get it. I'll put it in the show notes. I've got a link where you can download it and work on it on yourself. You can add things to it. It's just a nice way to plan things out. And for me, it's going to help me kind of decide which tracks go together, which ones to work on, which ones are closest to finished. I'm probably going to, I think I'm going to work with the ones that are closest to finished, because a lot of them actually have a lot of things in common. They're kind of like synth jams. And I have a couple ones that I've been working on over the last few months that I really want to include with this. So that's probably going to be my project. But today I want to talk about just some things to think about, where I think a nice place to be in the stage of the game now. You've probably got some ideas that you have decided you want to work on. And what do we do next? This is one of the hard parts of making music. You get a really cool loop or something, or a short piece of music, and then how do you move forward? And that's what we're going to talk about today. I had a couple little ideas. I don't want to give you too much at once, but just a few things to think about that I'm going to be focusing on myself. So, one of the key things that's helped me identify my different tracks and decide which ones go together and which ones maybe don't go together so well is just the instrumentation and the overall style of the song. So, I think this first idea is going to be very helpful and will probably apply to a lot of ideas at once, at least for me. And that is to identify what your focal point of your track is, what the background parts are, and what the kind of middle sections are like. So when you listen to a piece of music, there are parts that are kind of buried in the background. Often they're kind of rhythmic stuff, drums, bass, percussion, maybe little sound effects or something. Then you got things that are a little more in the middle, and that's often like our chords or our melodies or any kind of like part of the structural base of the song that sits on top of the rhythmic stuff. And then you have your focal point, and this is the thing that you kind of have as your lead element. It's up front. It's really important to identify what's going to be where, and I think that's a nice kind of way to start, is just have a background, middle ground, and focal point, or foreground, maybe you could say. So you've got like 3 layers. I think any more than that gets a little confusing. So stick with 3 layers and just try to identify what parts of your track are going to be each part. Now, as a solo producer like me, I'm sure there's a lot of you out there, where you've played every instrument, you've written every part, you've come up with every little thing that happens in the song. It's really tempting to kind of want to make them all the focal point. You worked hard on that little synth pad that probably is better off in the background just gluing things together, but you want everyone to hear the different textures. So you want to turn it up, and then you decide, well, the bass is really cool, so I'm going to turn that up too. I need people to hear how cool this bass line is. And you wind up doing this over and over, and then next thing you know, everything is kind of up front, which means nothing is up front. In order to have this sort of like depth to your mix, you have to sort of make sacrifices. Nothing can be close if something else isn't far away. These are relative terms. I could tell you that something within arm's reach is close to you, but not compared to something that's right in front of your face that you could, touch by just moving your head a little bit. Now that thing at arm's reach is actually far in comparison. So it's a relative term. So in order to have something close and focal, you need to have things that are also behind it. So it's important, I think, to make those decisions because it's very easy as you're working on the different elements of your mix to really get kind of attached and, emotionally attached to the different parts that you want to make everything pop up front. So I have a few ideas on how you can do this. So if we think about focal points, for instance, the things that stick out the most in music tend to be the things that are brightest. So they might have like a, nice high frequency content. They are also the things that are driest, meaning they don't usually have as much different effects on it, especially things like reverb or even delay. They tend to not have as much of that. And just, you can probably do a quick experiment if you talk in a microphone. When it's dry, it sounds like the person's talking right in your ear. But once you put the reverb on, it sounds like they're in a big hallway, and that sets them back a little bit. So they're usually pretty dry for the most part. I mean, obviously, these are rules you can all break. Have high frequency content. And I think they also are not so steady. They kind of come in and out a little bit. Think of a vocal, for instance. There's usually a phrase and then some sort of pause and then another phrase. It comes in and out, and it's pretty rhythmic, kind of jumps. It's not so much. I mean, there are sustained notes, but often there's lots of little rhythmic elements to that. So I think when things are long and sustained, or they don't ever pause or ever take little rests, it's easy for the mind to kind of tune it out and fade it into the background. And I think you've probably experienced this if there's ever been like a buzzing in a room or a humming noise. After a while, your mind kind of just like tunes it out, filters it out. Our brains are hardwired to pick up on change. We notice when something different happens. And I think this is an evolutionary thing. Evolutionary. I think it's something that has been kind of ingrained in us over the years. I mean, if we take it all the way back to cavemen, when there was a change in the environment, that's usually what got our attention. And maybe that was because there was a predator coming. So we hear the sound and we have to react to it. But when everything's kind of steady, we can get comfortable. So that's something to think about with your focal point, is something that is not so steady, that has different rhythmic changes, higher in pitch a lot of times, and not always, but usually there's high frequency content at least. And it tends to be drier, not so much saturated in reverb or delays and stuff like that. The stuff in your, we'll go to the middle ground now. That's going to be stuff that, again, I like to think of this a little bit in the range of the frequencies. It's kind of in your mid-range stuff. So these might be the chords, these might be other supporting elements, sound effects, things that kind of sit on top of your background stuff. And I think in general, if I can speak generally, background is going to be things like your drums, your bass, maybe like a soft pad or something, or things that are longer and sustained by nature that don't change a lot. Now, drums are kind of interesting because they do have like a very obviously percussive, but that their attack is real quick and they kind of fade out quick. So there's a lot of change, which means that they kind of jump through the mix a lot in volume. And with that in mind, I think you can kind of dial them back a little sometimes, or work with the transients so that you can set them in the background a little bit. And the ear is going to pick up on them naturally because they are constantly changing. They're constantly coming up and down in volume. So your ear will notice them. I think it's a tendency for me to really crank my drums up in my mixes. And often I think that just takes away a lot of the room for some of the other elements. Just a thought. And that definitely varies by genre, of course. Some genres need the drums up front and in your face, and some are better off with them really low and in the background. So you can set things into the background by using things like reverb and by filtering things down. So this is kind of the opposite of the focal point. If we want to dull something down and make it in the background, try putting a low-pass filter on it. Cut out some of those highs. Think about, for instance, if you hear someone talking in another room. They often sound more muffled, and sometimes you'll even hear kind of the echo of the voice maybe bouncing down the hallway or inside whatever room it might be. There's a distance. There's reflections coming to you before the actual sound sometimes, or the sound is buried in those reflections. So we can set things into the background by using a little bit of reverb. That will give it a sense of space, like it's got some distance. And we can also dull it down a little bit by cutting out some of the high frequencies. Stuff in the middle ground, I think, tend to fall in the category of things that you kind of want to be focal, but you don't want to get in the way of the focal point. They might be kind of important. A nice little technique I find you can do, and I think I read this in an interview with Brian Wilson when he was working on Pet Sounds, if I'm not mistaken. But the technique is, if you, again, we notice the change, right? Humans are hearing picks up on the change. So if you introduce a new element, you can start it out a little bit louder than you might want it actually in the mix, and then lower it in volume slowly. And the brain, now that it's heard it, it has identified it, and it can kind of be settled into the background a little bit more. So it kind of jumps through the mix in the beginning, and then you can kind of drop it a little. It's a technique I like to use a lot when, the mix might be getting cluttered, but I want you to hear like this particular sound I've been working on. It's, for whatever reason, needs to be noticed. So I might start it out a little bit louder and then automate it down in volume slowly, a couple dBs. So if you can identify what your focal point of your track is, what's going to be in the middle and what's in the background, you've done a lot of work, honestly. You've kind of painted the picture, created the setting for the track of what it's going to be, what the different elements are. And I think that's a big step. And it can, from there, you can actually go and start working on them. And I think we'll come back to this a little bit once we talk about mixing too. Another part that I like to do, and again, this is like in the planning world, this might not even be too much actually doing anything in the DAW yet, but to plan the story of the song. If you think of your song as a story, what does that look like? What is the beginning? What is the middle? What is the end? What is the high emotional point? What is the low point? Think about the dynamics. It might even make sense to kind of graph out like the intensity of the track. Is it going to be a track that starts small and gets bigger and bigger? Is it going to be a track that starts big and gets small, perhaps? You might kind of go against the norms. Or is it going to be something a little more traditional? And to kind of illustrate this, I want to talk about the famous plot diagram called Freytag's Pyramid. Freytag's Pyramid, you've probably seen before when you were in school, is also known as the witch's hat. It starts with a straight line, goes up, it basically makes a triangle, and then comes down. It looks like a witch's hat. And it's designed to graph the plot of the song, the intensity, the emotional impact, maybe, where the x-axis from left to right is time, and the y-axis is like emotional intensity or drama. So most pieces of literature, most stories follow the Freytag's Pyramid. A lot of TV shows, songs, etc. Things that have stories tend to follow this. So this can be a good place to start. It starts with the exposition, which is kind of your introduction. This is where the setting is established in the story. This is where the characters are introduced. So as far as music goes, this can be where you sort of set the BPM, you set the key, you set the mood a little bit of the track. It's not generally a very intense part of the song. It's just introductory. This is where we are. We then move on as we start going up now into the rising action. And this is the part in a story where the conflict is introduced. The problem happens, and then, they get layered on, and it keeps gaining intensity as we go on through the story. And this is something you can think about in your track. What are you going to do to sort of add depth to the story of your song? Is it adding elements? Is it adding some tension? Is it adding some sort of drama with your sounds, or adding different elements that come in and help create a certain kind of mood. I like to think a lot of music and a lot of things in life, I guess, like as tension and release, building up tension so that the release is satisfying. And that's what the rising action is all about, kind of building up a tension. This might be a pre-chorus, this might be some section of the song that kind of makes you anticipate a certain kind of cadence in which a following chord is implied by the chords that are coming up. It can be a lot of different things. The rising action keeps going and we get a climax, and this is kind of the height of our intensity, the most powerful part of the song, often the chorus. And sometimes it's, the final chorus, but usually the chorus is kind of the climax of the song. So what's that part going to look like? And again, you might tie this in with the first thing we talked about, which is the focal point, the middle ground, the background. What's going to come up in the climax of the song? How are you going to use these elements to build the tension? The next part of the Freytag's pyramid is the falling action, which is after the climax happens, everything that's kind of a result of that. So this could be like kind of like a post-chorus little section that gets you back into a verse, kind of the echo, and I don't mean that so much literally like a sound echo, but kind of the residual parts of the chorus fading out and going into the background as the verse comes back in and we come back into the next section. And obviously there's a lot of sections you can go to, but we usually come back down at the song after the climax. And then there's sort of the resolution, which is another flat line. So we've gone exposition, which is flat, rising action, which is like a 45-degree angle up. Climax is the top. Falling action is another 45-degree angle. Well, I guess that would be, I don't know, another degree, not 45, but it's going down. And then we reach another flat point, which is our resolution. And you might think of this as your outro. And often this kind of reflects a lot of what happened in the intro. And this can be a great way to end a track, is to sort of bookend it, as I like to say. So a book has two, a cover and a back cover, and they're the same. A book ending in a track would be when you come back to a similar part, you kind of reference the beginning, and it kind of gives a full circle feeling. In writing, it might be like finishing up something that you started in the beginning. Think about maybe like The Wizard of Oz, for instance. I always think is a good story with bookending. It starts out with Dorothy in black and white in Kansas. The tornado's coming. Then she goes to Oz. The whole story happens. And then it ends with her back in Kansas, waking up from that dream. So this could be like something that you put your song through. And now you've kind of got a complete narrative to your story. You've taken us through an intro. You've brought up some tension, some conflict. Conflict is so important in a story. A story without conflict has really no point. Who wants to hear a story without a conflict? Nothing happens. Everything just kind of goes according to plan. It's not exciting. We like the drama. We like the tension. We like problems in our stories. That's what's exciting about it. And just try to take any problem out of your favorite TV show or movie, and like, what do you have? You got the Avengers running around with no bad guys, no crime to fight. Well, who cares? That's going to get boring soon. So we need the conflict. So if we can kind of map out the story or the narrative of our song, it's going to help us make some nice informed decisions too. We can realize where our tension is going to be, where our room for growth, and where our big climax, the big moments are. And I think you might find your track might not look so much like just one single mountain or witch's hat, or however you want to describe the look of Freytag's pyramid. It might be a few of those, and it might go up a little, down a little, up a little, down a little, and then a big drop and big up. That's whatever. That you can have varying degrees and changing directions in your tension and in your drama of your track, but might not be a bad idea to just plan that out a little bit. So maybe we'll stop there actually for today, because I think those are two kind of big things to think about. I've got a few more I want to talk about, but I don't want to do them all at once. I want to kind of spread them out a little bit so that we can do this in bite-sized portions. And because I think often, doing a song, doing a track, and in this case, I'm trying to do EPs and stuff. It's a lot to deal with at once. It's a lot to focus on. So it can be overwhelming to have too many things going on at once. So I think I'm still in the planning stage a little bit here, where I'm thinking about the focal points of my tracks. What's going to be the main element? That's going to be the thing that I'm going to have up front. It might be a vocal. It might be some sort of lead. It might be some sort of melody or something, whatever. But deciding that is super important. So we get this like hierarchy of what's up front, what's in the middle, what's in the back. And then just the story of the song. What's the dramatic arc of it? Where does it go up? Where does it come down? Does it start at high intensity? Does it start real low and just build all the way up to the climax? Certain writers, and Edgar Allan Poe comes to mind. Edgar Allan Poe always believed that the story should end as close to the climax as possible. And if you think to some of his classic stories, I think The Telltale Heart is probably one most people know, where he basically buries the guy under the floorboards because he didn't like the look of his vulture eye. Eerie story, definitely worth reading. He's one of my favorite writers, but the story keeps building and the tension builds and builds throughout. It starts tense, it builds, and it ends at the highest point, the climax, when everything just kind of gives and the narrator kind of loses his cool. And I won't spoil it if you haven't read it already, but he does his final action, and that's the end of the story. And you're kind of left like, whoa, you're left, oh my God, that was crazy. And you don't get a chance to unsettle from that. And that was something he liked to do. He liked to take the reader on that journey and kind of leave them at the climactic moment. And I think if you've binge watched any series on Netflix or any of these kind of shows that have like a constantly rolling plot into the next episode, often they're leaving you right around the climax of that particular episode, because that's where your drama, where your tension is the highest, and you want to resolve that. So they ask you if you want to start the next episode, and it just rolls in. And that's why you wind up watching 5 or 6 episodes in a row, because you've been left at the climax every time and you feel unsettled and you want that settlement. And they're very clever in how they just pull you right back into more rising action. Maybe that's something to think about as far as like the composition of an album or EP is concerned too. How do you get people to keep listening to the next track? Maybe borrow a little bit from the Netflix series binge watching strategy of leaving you at the climax. Maybe that's something to think about. But for today, let's see if we can't get that stuff going, figure out some of the focal points, the middle ground, the background. Let's plan the story, get an idea of where it's going. And a couple kind of cool resources I thought I would just share with you that I think are really helpful for this stage of the game. Actually, just today, Andrew Huang came out with a YouTube video called How to Make Tracks and Not Just Loops. 10-minute video. If you haven't seen his stuff, he's awesome. He's got a lot of great videos, ideas, crazy projects he's working on. He's always doing something interesting, and he's always teaching throughout. Great attitude, cool music, lots of awesome techniques, well edited. It's entertaining. Can't recommend him enough. And check out that track. I'll put that in the show notes, How to Make Tracks and Not Just Loops. But also, probably one of the if you don't have this in your studio, you should really get it. It's called Making Music. It's a book by Dennis DeSantis from Ableton. It's published by Ableton, but it's not an Ableton-centric book. The only thing that Ableton Live has to do with the book is the screenshots, but all the techniques are completely DAW agnostic, I think we can say, where it's not telling you need to be using in Ableton Live, click here. It's nothing like that. It's just general information. 74 creative strategies for electronic music producers. It's called Making Music. It's published by Ableton. And you can actually go to makingmusic.ableton.com and preview about a third of the book. And it's really nicely laid out. It's got it's divided into 3 sections: problems of beginning, problems of progressing, and problems of finishing. So kind of 3 stages of making a track: starting, progressing and finishing. And there are, for progressing, which is where I'd kind of say we are right now, it looks like there's about 12 chapters, and it's all free. There's obviously more in the book, but this is great for, I'll put the link in the show notes, again, makingmusic.ableton.com, because I think there's a lot of really good ideas. We'll probably talk about some of these in the podcast as we're doing this. So there we have it. Some steps to take: identifying the focal point, middle ground, background of your track. What are going to be those different elements? And then plan the story of your track. So thanks so much for listening. Thanks for staying with me for 50 episodes. If you're just joining, thanks for joining us. If you've been here since the beginning, I really appreciate it. This is, one of my favorite things to do is this podcast, and hearing from you guys is great. So thanks so much for listening. Please tell someone if you like this, share, spread the word on social media, give reviews wherever you get your podcasts. All that stuff helps a lot, and kind of lights the fire for me to make podcast episodes when there are so many other things in life pulling me in different directions. The support I've gotten from everybody has been awesome, and I really appreciate it. So thanks again. This is the Music Production Podcast, and I'm Brian Funk. Have a great day, and good luck working on those tracks.